الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله أما بعد أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وما أرسلناك إلا رحمة للعالمين وقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم من لا يرحم لا يرحم. My brothers and sisters in Islam, I thank you all for attending this talk, which is on the history of Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain or Muslim Spain or Muslim Iberia. Al-Andalus is a very important episode in Muslim history. This particular period when Muslims governed much of Spain for almost 7 centuries or just over 7 centuries, this period has a lot of lessons for Muslims living today. If we were to study the history of Al-Andalus or Muslim Spain carefully, we will learn many important lessons today in the world. Firstly, why is history important? History teaches you lessons. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran repeatedly gives us histories of the previous nations. The purpose of repeating the stories of Banu Israel and the people of Dawood and people of Sulaiman and people of Nuh and people of other prophets for that matter is to teach you lessons. These stories are told for a reason, and the reason is to get people to contemplate, to ponder upon the errors and the mistakes of the previous nations so that we don't repeat them. And also at the same time, we repeat what they did right. If they did something right, we must repeat it. All their virtuous acts, all their good deeds, all the achievements that were positive, we must repeat them. That's why history is a very powerful argument from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we must learn from the errors and the virtues of the past nations. This is why knowing your history as Muslims in particular and as humans in general is absolutely crucial. You cannot ignore history. A people who forget their history are condemned to relive it. If you don't learn from your history, if you don't take lessons from what happened before you, you will fall victim to same problems, same diseases, same errors, same social destructions that occurred in the past. So to avoid the disasters and the catastrophes and the mistakes and the errors of the past, you must study history very carefully. Otherwise they will repeat. They keep repeating themselves. This is why repetition or reminders about history are so important. Al-Andalus was a very important aspect of Islamic civilization. Firstly, how did it happen? Islam emerged with the advent of Rasulullah, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the 7th century. The Prophet was born in the 6th century, and in the 7th century he passed away. In 632 CE, 11 Hijri, the Islamic year, the Prophet passed away, having preached for almost 23 years. And the message he preached was a message of justice, compassion and love. The purpose of his advent was mercy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stated in the Quran in chapter 21, Surah Al-Anbiya, verse 107, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وما أرسلناك إلا رحمة للعالمين. This is what Allah told the Prophet and his companions and the following Muslim generations, posterity, that the purpose of the advent of the Prophet of Islam was nothing but mercy. And this was the message that was to be taken around the world. And to a large extent, Muslims did succeed in delivering this mercy and justice to the best of their abilities, respectively, in different places around the world. Al-Andalus was one of those places. But why did the Muslims end up in Al-Andalus in Spain in the first place? What were they doing there? thousands of miles away from Arabia, where the Prophet of Islam was born. What were the Muslims doing outside in the first place? This was primarily to deliver the justice of Islam to those who didn't have it. Like the Prophet commanded ﷺ that take the message of Islam to those who are absent. So the Sahaba, to this effect, confronted the Persians, the Byzantines, the Romans, and this was foretold by the Prophet ﷺ. This was a prophecy made by the Prophet ﷺ that the believers, my followers primarily, the Sahaba and their followers, will clash with the Persians, the Sassanid Persian Empire and the Byzantine Roman Empire, and they will be victorious. And when you have victory, remember, establish justice. Be just. So despite all the Islamophobia and all the misconceptions deliberately spread about Islamic civilization and how Muslims behaved, there is a lot of evidence for you to study to see how the Muslims actually behaved towards the masses of these lands. In fact, speaking about Al-Andalus in particular, when Muslims arrived in Al-Andalus in 711 CE, 92 Hijri, in the reign of Abdul Malik bin Marwan. In the reign of Walid bin Abdul Malik. Walid bin Abdul Malik was the son of Abdul Malik bin Marwan, an Umayyad caliph. And Walid came to power in 86 Hijri and remained in power till 95 or 96 Hijri. And then came to power Sulaiman bin Abdul Malik. So it was during the reign of Walid bin Abdul Malik when Tariq bin Ziyad landed in Al-Andalus. Tariq was sent by a general called Musa bin Nusayr. Musa bin Nusayr was working under the leadership or the supervision of the governor of Qayrawan. Qayrawan was effectively Tunisia. Nowadays, the land of Tunisia was actually at that time was called Afriqiya. The reason why the continent of Africa is called Africa is because Muslims named the territory of current day Tunisia as Afriqiya. So when you find Umayyad and Abbasid coins minted in Afriqiya, that is actually Tunisia. And later on, the entire continent was given the name Africa because of Afriqiya. Okay? So Qayrawan was the place where the governor was governing on behalf of the Umayyads, and he sent Musa bin Nusayr, and Musa bin Nusayr then sent his lieutenant called Tariq bin Ziyad. Tariq bin Ziyad landed in Spain in 711. This was actually prophesied by the Prophet ﷺ. Prophet and the Quran made this prophecy in chapter 24, verse 55. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وعد الله الذين آمنوا منكم وعملوا الصالحات ليستخلفنهم في الأرض كما استخلف الذين من قبلهم. It is a promise of Allah to those who believe among you and do righteous deeds that Allah will give you succession in the land. You will overpower the land. You will defeat the current empires in the world. And this expansion, what we call the early Islamic conquests, early Islamic expansion, was so rapid that to this day historians are baffled. They don't know how it happened so fast. How were the early Muslims able, within 2 generations, were able to take all this land and then keep it, sustain the government for centuries to come. This was a phenomenon. Many modern historians of Islam in the West have, contemplated this question. And they still don't know how this actually happened, practically speaking. To us it is easy. We can easily claim as believers that the Quran made a prophecy in this regard, which was fulfilled to the letter. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had foretold that this religion, this faith will reach every single corner of this planet. So Muslims had conquered all of North Africa, throughout the 6th century, and in the throughout the 7th century, during the Umayyad period, these conquests continued. And then came a time when Uqba bin Nafi, one of the Muslim generals, reached the Atlantic Ocean. The Atlantic Ocean, when he reached there, he said, I wish I knew if there is land on the other side, and if there was, I would go there as well. So he had to stop because there was no more land left, as if Allah wanted to keep that side for later for someone else, as we will see. So, in the year 92 Hijri, 711 CE, there was a civil war within Spain, what we know today as Spain. There was a civil war between the Visigoths, who were governing Spain at the time. Visigoths were by now Catholic Christians, while previously they had followed a different version of Christianity, which was Unitarian. They were Vandals. They were initially called Vandals. And this is why a lot of people think the word Al-Andalus actually originates from the word Vandals, people who were living in Spain at the time. Vandals were later on known as Visigoths, who actually governed the land of Spain. And when the Muslims arrived in Spain at the time, Visigothic King Roderick, who claimed sovereignty over the land of Spain, was fighting his rivals. So there was a civil war going on. And some of the people invited the Muslims to attack Spanish territory and take it. Militarily, take it. And there were many people persecuted in the land of Spain, such as the Jews. The Jewish people were under heavy persecution in the land of Spain at the time. For example, in the year 633 CE, exactly a year after the Prophet of Islam passed away, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, an ecumenical council was held in the city of Toledo in Spain. Ecumenical councils were church councils where the Christian bishops would convene and they would come and they would decide on the matters of the country. You know, they would deal with different questions people would be facing, or different problems people would be facing. When they would bring the problems up, the Catholic Church or the clergy, churchmen would decide as to what must be done. So one of the questions that came in this council was the question of the Jewish people in Spain at the time, who were living under the domain of Catholic Church, Christianity. So it was decided by the bishops that the Jewish people, the children are to be taken away from them by force. The children are to be taken away from them by force, and they are to be raised as Catholics, as Christians, by force. Right? So this was heavy persecution against the Jewish people, who were facing extinction at the hands of the Catholic Church at the time in Spain, before the Muslims even thought of coming to Spain. But when Muslims came about 8 years later, in 711 CE, then the Jewish people were supporting the Muslim cause. They came forward and they said, come and liberate us, please, from this oppression and from this tyranny of the Catholic Church. And this is clearly confirmed by Jewish historians. One of them is called Zion Zohar, who is an American Jewish historian. He wrote a history recently titled A History of the Sephardic and Mizrahi Jewry. On page 8 and 9 he states that when Muslims landed at Gibraltar, led by Tariq bin Ziyad, the Jewish inhabitants of Spain welcomed them as liberators, amazingly. So when Muslims arrived in Spain, cut the long story short, if I start talking about the political history of Spain, it will take me 10 hours, literally, wallahi. And the history is so painful. It is so painful to go through, not because of the length of the content, it is also because of what we have to cover. The details, the painful details of negligence, selfish behavior, greed, treachery, all sorts of things. All sorts of things. It is very, very painful. We cannot possibly cover the political history of Spain in such a short lecture. But what I would like to highlight very quickly is a brief summary, inshallah. So 711 Muslims landed in Spain, and they found Visigoths divided. So Muslims, one after another, took many towns in Spain. Although at that time, some people made claims that Muslims were massacring and they were burning towns and they were torching villages and all that. There is a chronicle written in 754, an anonymous Christian chronicle written by a Christian churchman. One of the churchmen, he was a clergy, he wrote this chronicle. It's called the Chronicle of 754. It is an anonymous chronicle. It claims that the Muslims, when they conquered Spain, they were committing atrocities such as burning villages and buildings and all that. Later on, scholars, when they studied the evidence, they realized that this was a lie. This was actually a misrepresentation of facts, because after Muslims took these cities, archaeologically, it is clear that these cities flourished under the domain of Islam for centuries. So, in fact, it was before the Muslims came to Spain, a lot of these cities were declining economically, socially. There was a decline in Spain. And so sharp was the decline that the conquest of Spain was made so easy for the Muslims. Within 7 years, Muslims had conquered 90% of the Iberian Peninsula. So after Tariq bin Ziyad landed in Spain in 711, sometime later, Musa bin Nusayr, the leader of Tariq bin Ziyad, also joined him, and then both of them together conquered the rest of Spain. And some parts of northern Spain, northwestern Spain, were left untouched, and some of the Visigoths took refuge in the mountains of northwestern Spain. And later on, this particular patch which was left by the Muslims became a problem for them, because a government was established there by Christian renegades, runaways, people who would escape from mainland Spain, and they would go and join forces, and then they started attacking Muslims later on, which is another story altogether. So now, after Spain had been conquered, Musa bin Nusayr was established. The greatest struggle Muslims faced later on after this conquest was to consolidate this power. So Muslims offered terms to the Spanish people. Those who were fighting were hostile, of course, the Muslims had to fight them, but those who surrendered, Muslims gave them terms. So one of the treaties which can be found in recent texts, for example, Olivia Rennell has compiled a history of Spain, and she has, in her book, put down the actual treaty between the son of Musa bin Nusayr, who was Abdulaziz bin Musa bin Nusayr, who became the leader of Spain for some short time, and he had married a local Spanish woman who was a Christian. He had married her. He gave terms to 7 cities. So it was a coalition of 7 cities governed by one man called Theodomir, or Gabdouche, I think his name was Gabdouche. He was governing this coalition of 7 cities. So the terms go as follows. The land governed by Gabdouche is under the protection of Allah and His Messenger. They are free to practice their religion as they deem fit, as long as they pay jizya, which is 1 dinar per head, 1 gold coin, which is 4 grams of gold. A dinar was approximately 4 grams of gold, which is in current day value about 120 pounds, something like that, possibly 150 pounds. Okay, so every able working person would have to pay 1 gold coin per year. That's the tax, okay, for the well-being of the society. So long as these 7 cities did not rebel and did not shelter the enemy of the Muslims, they were to remain in peace. So this treaty is there, it is in the sources, and it can be found in the book of Olivia Rennell, who has compiled all the treaties together. So this is how the Muslims gave terms, and they lived in peace with Christian states or Christian city-states in the Iberian Peninsula. Not every single city or not every single territory was annexed or conquered completely. Rather, Christian rulers were left to rule the territory so long as they were not hostile. So Muslims established this order slowly and steadily. But what happened then later was bickering among Muslims. The Berbers and the Arabs had friction between them. Because when initially Tariq bin Ziyad landed in Spain, his army consisted of the Arabs, 5,000 Arabs and 7,000 Berbers. 12,000 Muslims. They confronted an army of 100,000 men led by King Roderick in the Battle of Guadalete, also known as Wadi al-Kabir in the Arabic language. And Guadalete is actually a corruption of the word Wadi al-Kabir. Okay, so there was a battle that took place between Tariq bin Ziyad, 12,000 Muslims and 100,000 Visigoths led by King Roderick. King Roderick lost the battle and Muslims were victorious, and city after city fell to the Muslims. So now these Berbers, unfortunately, they started to rebel against the Arab authority, to cut the long story short. And this bickering between the Muslims caused some of the northern Christian coalitions to gain confidence, and they started to attack territory after territory, and they took some land from the Muslims. Before all of this chaos was put to rest by the arrival of a new Umayyad prince called Abdurrahman al-Dakhil. Okay, he was an Umayyad prince who was a fugitive from the Abbasids. Now don't forget, I want you to remember what's happening in the Muslim lands in the Middle East. The Umayyad Caliphate was based in Damascus, and it lasted until 132 Hijri. It lasted until 132 Hijri. So Spain was conquered, or the conquest of Spain started in 92 Hijri. So between 92 Hijri and 132 Hijri, how long is it? 40 years. 40 years. So within these 40 years, there was a lot of chaos in Spain. After the conquest, the Berbers and the Arabs were fighting each other, and then the Arabs themselves were fighting each other. And in this chaos, the Fihri clan of the Arabs came to power. The descendants of Uqba bin Nafi', one of the initial conquerors of North Africa, his descendants had come to power, and they were trying to consolidate their power, but they couldn't do it. So the people of Spain, the Arabs as well as the Berbers, they were looking up to someone else to come and take power from the Fihri clan. And who came to who came to take power? Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, who was a runaway prince who was escaping with his life from the Abbasids. Now, in 132, Abu Muslim al-Khurasani, an Abbasid sympathizer, had launched a rebellion against the Umayyads from current-day Persia. And the Abbasid leader of the revolution was called As-Safah. He was the first Abbasid caliph who governed from 132 to 136. He was called As-Safah because of his cruelty. He was very, very cruel. He carried out a massacre against the Umayyads. Umayyad royal families and the family of the caliphs were systematically wiped out, killed off. Some of them escaped, and one of them was Abdurrahman al-Dakhil. In fact, there is a story about Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, historically narrated, that he was escaping from his enemies, the Abbasids, and there was a river in front of him. It was him and his brother. And they started to swim to get to the other side, to escape. The Abbasids from the other side, they started to call them back, that come back, you are our brothers, we will not kill you, we will not harm you. Abdurrahman al-Dakhil did not believe that. And he continued to tell his brother, keep swimming, go to the other side, go to the other side. Do not believe these people. But he believed them. Abdurrahman's brother believed them, and he turned around and he went to the Abbasids to surrender. Abdurrahman kept swimming and he went to the other side, and when he looked back, in front of his eyes, the Abbasids, or the Abbasid contingent that was actually pursuing them, killed him in cold blood. His brother killed Abdurrahman's brother in front of his eyes. So Abdurrahman turned around and he made his way to Spain. where he found some sympathy. Cut the long story short, he arrived in Spain as a young man in his early 20s, and the Spanish Muslims found this a great opportunity to put all the chaos to rest. So they united upon him, and they said, because he is an Umayyad prince, he has more right than the Fihris to govern Spain. So he united. For the next 30 years, he created a very powerful entity, a very powerful government for himself. The Muslims, the Berbers and the Arabs united under the leadership of Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, the first Umayyad Amir of Spain. And then this amirship continued for another 2 centuries until 929 CE. So for 2 centuries, Amir after Amir came to govern Spain, and this was a golden age. Of course, there was a lot of political chaos. There were many rebellions. The Berbers and the Arabs, the friction continued. It never died down, unfortunately. And there's a lesson in this. The lesson in this is that Muslims, a lot of the times, due to a number of reasons, when they are together in a place, they find reasons to disagree with each other. And sometimes these disagreements cause them to become violent. And this violence causes the Muslims to lose what they have. It is as simple as that. And we have failed to learn from our history. Repeatedly, we ignore our history. Okay? There is this spirit of rebellion in Muslims, unfortunately, generally speaking. I'm not saying all Muslims are like that. Of course, rebellion is utterly haram in Islam. So long as your ruler is a believer and he observes Islam, it is haram to rebel against your rulers. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ made it very, very clear. There are reports in Sahih Muslim, right, that you obey the ruler even if he is oppressing some of you, even if he is oppressive. Okay, you obey him for the greater good. This is a pragmatic position which the Prophet ﷺ taught the Muslims. For the greater good, because you may be oppressed as an individual by this ruler, but the impact of his governorship around the country is keeping things in harmony. He is keeping things together. You remove the ruler and his establishment, all hell breaks loose. All hell breaks. What happens then? Bandits, robbers, killers, murderers, rapists, they go on loose and they start causing chaos. Right? This was the pragmatic position Rasulullah ﷺ was teaching the believers. But unfortunately, in many places, the Muslims didn't take these teachings seriously, and they ended up causing catastrophes. So the Berber and the Arab divide in Spain caused major damage. The problem was from both sides. The Arabs, they had their nakhwa, their asabiyah. They looked down upon the Berbers. The Berbers, recent Muslims, so the Berbers don't deserve any powerful positions. The Berbers were always given difficult positions to defend, and they had to guard or garrison places that were difficult to defend. The Arabs always had easy, privileged, status. So this caused problems. So these problems they escalated to an extent where it started to affect Muslim unity. But I'll have a cup of tea, inshallah, if that's possible. It started to affect Muslim unity, and this disunity affected the very existence of Muslims in Spain. And even the Muslims of Spain, within Spain, did not learn from these incidents that took place in the early history of Islamic Spain, when the Berbers and the Arabs bickered with each other. Then came some powerful rulers who were able to unite. For example, after Abdurrahman al-Dakhil had come to Spain in 750s, when he had come to Spain, for 2 centuries, almost 2 centuries, there was relative peace. Umayyad Amirs, the descendants of Abdurrahman al-Awwal, Abdurrahman the First, they kept peace for almost 2 centuries. In 929, the Umayyad government of Spain declared itself to be a caliphate, led by Abdurrahman III. Abdurrahman III was the most powerful monarch in Western Europe. In Western Europe. He became so powerful that he declared himself to be the rightful caliph of the Muslim world. So there were three caliphs in the Muslim world at the time. The Abbasid caliph in Baghdad, the Fatimid caliph in Egypt, and the Umayyad caliph in Spain, who was very, very powerful. He was so powerful that the European powers in the north or the northwest, they were paying homage to him. Cordoba became the largest city in the world. It had a population of 1 million people. Larger than Constantinople, it became the largest city in the world. It was the most cosmopolitan, most multicultural place in the world. You had Northern Europeans coming to Cordoba. You had Muslims coming from Baghdad, Damascus to learn in the universities and the educational institutions of Cordoba. Cordoba became a magnet for scholars, for researchers, for people who wanted to go to the best institutions, to the best scholars, to the best teachers in the world. So by the mid-10th century, 920s, when Abdurrahman III was governing the land of Spain, one of the descendants of Abdurrahman al-Dakhil, Spain was a power, a European power, if not a global power, had a huge influence for a number of reasons. It was wealthy. Some of the largest libraries in the world were in Cordoba. There was convivencia. The Jews, the Muslims, and the Christians coexisted. In fact, one of the prime ministers for this particular caliph was a Jewish man, Hasdai ibn Shaprut. He was a Jewish intellectual. He was a physician, and he was appointed as the vizier, as the prime minister, and he was also taking care of the finances. So this was a period known as the Golden Age for the Jews. The Jewish people flourished. They produced some of the best scholars in their history during this period. So when a lot of the Islamophobes today talk about Islam and ISIS, they link Islam to ISIS. What they do is they jump from the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam straight to ISIS. This is a very clever game Islamophobes play with the Muslims, to put the Muslims on back foot, to put the Muslims in an apologetic position, that the Muslims must now start to apologize for Islam, for believing in Islam, for looking like Muslims. Hijabi women, they have to apologize for their hijab. Bearded men, they have to apologize for their beards. Muslims who want to practice Islam to the letter, they have to be apologetic. They have to be ashamed of Islam. Why? ISIS. Look what you have done. Look, you Muslims, what you have done. You have produced ISIS. We tell them, hold on. Let's talk sense. Let's talk with information. And take the bigger picture into consideration. We didn't get to ISIS just like that from the Prophet ﷺ. Between the Prophet and where we ended up today, politically speaking, or what's happening in the Middle East, there is what we call the Muslim civilization for over 1,000 years. What happened in Spain? What are you going to do with the scholars, the philosophers, the scientists, the theologians, the muhaddithin, the poets, the intellectuals of Al-Andalus? If we were not to take the intellectuals from Damascus, Baghdad, and Qayrawan, and Qahira, and Samarkand and Bukhara into consideration, if we were not to take them into consideration, because they were also part of the Muslim civilization, the Muslim civilization dominated the world for over 1,000 years in all these fields I mentioned: philosophy, education, technology, book production, architecture, art, intellectual activity, science, you name it. The Muslims dominated the world for over 1,000 years. Will you now put that achievement into the basket of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? This is the question I ask these people who jump straight from the Prophet to ISIS. What are you going to do with this? The history of over 1,000 years, our libraries, our hospitals. There is no Western civilization without the Muslim contribution, which I will highlight very quickly before I finish. There is no Western civilization without the Muslim contribution. So, these people who jump from the Prophet to ISIS, they are either completely ignorant of our history, of our achievements in the past, or they are malicious liars, or they are completely malicious liars who are deliberately pumping hate against Islam and Muslims. Okay? By the way, these extremist groups, and what they're doing is a product of geopolitics. What's been happening in the Middle East, foreign policies of certain countries. They have been conducting mass murder in the name of democracy and in the name of other ideologies. So how is that a problem of Muslims? Did we cause it? Did we produce these people? Are they a reaction to Islam, or are they reacting to something barbaric they have been facing? So extremism breeds extremism. When you have extreme actions, you have extreme reactions, right? So extremists are brothers of each other. They cause each other to come about. It is extremism that gives birth to extremism. It has nothing to do with Muslims. We are proud of our civilization. We will always believe in Islam. We will always be proud of the legacy of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We'll always hold onto it. We will always be proud of it, inshallah. So, Spain is a point to be noted. Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain. There were European scholars during this period traveling to Muslim lands in Spain to learn from the Muslim scholars. The knowledge of science, philosophy, came directly from Spain to the Europeans. The Europeans, because of their focus on Christian theological literature, had completely lost touch with the works of the Greeks and the Romans and the others. So the Muslims took that beneficial knowledge and they worked on it. They were teaching it. So for example, in the libraries of Cordoba, in the Arabic language, Qartaba, in the institutions and the academies of Qartaba, there were Muslim scholars with turbans and beards. They were teaching Europeans, Jews, Arabs, Berbers, people coming from the Middle East. People from the whole world were flocking. They were coming to Al-Andalus, to Spain, to learn from the Muslim scholars, to learn the theology. There were muhaddithin in Spain. Spain, Islamic Spain, produced some of the major scholars in Islamic history. Imam al-Qurtubi. His name is al-Qurtubi, from Qartaba, from Cordoba. He is one of the greatest mufassir, one of the greatest mufassirin in Muslim history. Someone who wrote a giant commentary on the Quran. So, two of the best commentaries of the Quran are what? The most prominent, the most popular, and the most famous ones. Who is going to name them? Anyone? One is Tabari. One is Tabari, and the other one is Qurtubi. All scholars of Islam, when they write a commentary on the Quran, they have to refer back to these two sources. They have to. They have no choice. They have to look at the tafsir of Imam Ibn Jarir al-Tabari and Imam al-Qurtubi. Without these two tafsirs, they feel as if they haven't done justice to the commentary of the Quran. Then we have Ibn al-Hazm. Ibn al-Hazm was an intellectual, a poet, a theologian, a philosopher. Like we have people like Ibn Rushd, also known as Averroes in the European lands. At the time he was known as Averroes. And he was a theologian, a Muslim theologian, a Muslim imam, a faqih of the Maliki fiqh. He was actually the Qadi of Qurtaba, and he had written commentaries on the works of Aristotle, although that caused him problems later on because he drifted away slightly from some of the mainstream Islamic opinions. But that doesn't take away the fact that he was a product of the Muslim civilization. Even some people point at Ibn Sina, that he was a mulhid, he was a heretic, Islamically speaking. Islamic theologians, they had declared him to be a heretic, an outcast. Basically, he completely broke away from the Islamic tradition. That's fine, that may be true. Major scholars of Islam actually some of them made takfir of him. They said he was not even a Muslim because of the things he wrote. But that doesn't take away the fact that he was a product of the Islamic civilization. His good achievements and his errors are with him. They cannot be taken away from him. But you cannot take his good achievements. You cannot divorce his good achievements. His book Al-Qanun, the canon, was taught in Europe for almost 5 centuries as the major text on medicine. As late as the 16th century, Al-Qanun was being printed in Europe in the Arabic language as well as Latin translations. Ibn Sina's Al-Qanun. Are you going to say this is now without Islam? Of course not. That's a positive achievement of Ibn Sina, and it was a product of the Muslim civilization. So Spain is absolutely crucial if you want to understand what happened in Europe in the 12th century and beyond. When it comes to advancement of knowledge, literature, technology, intellectual activity, you have to look at Islamic Spain. There are scholars who have written extensively on this topic. For example, one of them is called George Saliba. George Saliba has written a book titled The Arabic Origins of the European Renaissance. By the way, George Saliba is a Lebanese Christian. He's not a Muslim, right? So he hasn't been paid by the Saudis to write this book. Okay? He has written this book to show how the European Renaissance of the 15th and the 16th century was directly inspired by the Arabs, the Muslims in Spain specifically, in particular, and other places like Sicily and the Middle East. Then there are books like the Arabic role in European literature. This book is written by a scholar called Maria Rosa Menocal. She's a Spanish Arabist, and she has written extensively on Spain and the history of Spain. And she actually wrote a book titled The Ornament of the World, describing the peaceful coexistence between the Muslims of Spain and other faiths during the Islamic period. This is what we look up to. This is what we sell to the world as our example. It was not perfect. It was never perfect, no doubt. But what it produced cannot be taken away from us. You cannot say that this is not an achievement of Islam. What the Muslims achieved in Spain, anything positive, in any field, cannot be taken away from the Quran, because Quran is the seed and the Muslim civilization is the fruit, or the tree, or the branches. Every tree has branches. The root is the Quran. There is no Islam without the Quran, and there is no Muslim civilization without Islam. You cannot separate them. You cannot separate them. So Al-Andalus progressed until 1031. In 1031, the Umayyad Caliphate was dismantled. Unfortunately, in the early 11th century, there were some rebellions against the Umayyad authority, and there were divisions within the Muslim scholarship. Ibn al-Hazm, rahmatullah alayhi, who was alive at the time when all of this chaos was taking place, he was a loyalist. In other words, he was a supporter of the Caliphate. And you know, the word Caliphate has become very controversial nowadays, again because of ISIS. They tarnished the word. They tarnished the word. Okay, when you look at the Umayyad Caliphate in Spain, where Jews, Christians and Muslims coexisted together, working together for the common good of humanity, studying in the same institutions, without any persecution or any discrimination. That was also a caliphate, where Europeans were flocking to learn in Muslim universities. So when it is positive, when it looks positive, you don't want to talk about it. But when something barbaric happens, you want to call it caliphate. This is wrong. This is what we call injustice, historic injustice, right? So we have to be very careful when we talk about concepts. So in 1031, the Umayyad Caliphate was dismantled, and then what followed was Al-Maluk al-Tawaif. Okay, the Muslim states, they all split into different groups, and what happened was Spain was divided into tons of different petty states all over Spain. We had different kings claiming to be caliphs, and they were all claiming to be authorities or the rightful rulers of Spain, and they all split into different tiny states. When this happened, now think about this, what this unity does to the Muslims, what it has done historically to us. This unity, when you disunite over petty things, over selfish gains, because all of these rulers, they have died. Every single ruler who governed one of these petty states in Spain is gone, finished, dead and buried, graves. We don't know where they are. When they were alive, they thought they are the Amirul Mu'mineen. I am the rightful ruler. I have a military, I have an army. But they were very short-sighted. When the Umayyad Caliphate was dismantled in 1031 CE, having governed effectively for almost 3 centuries, having kept the Muslim civilization in Spain united, having benefited humanity on that scale I have already discussed, where Europeans, people from the Middle East, people from Africa were flocking to Spain to learn from Muslim scholars. You know, you cannot produce a civilization without peace and tranquility, without justice and a sense of security. Even Will Durant, one of the American philosophers, he was writing in the 70s, he wrote a history of civilization. On the first page of the first volume of his book, and the first volume is titled Our Oriental Heritage, he writes, a civilization consists of 4 elements. It consists of 4 elements: economic provisions, political stability, pursuit of knowledge and arts, and moral traditions. I will repeat: economic provisions, political stability, pursuit of knowledge and arts, and moral traditions. These 4 elements make civilizations or a civilization. And all of these 4 elements rest upon one pillar, and that pillar is sense of security and justice. You remove justice, all of these 4 elements will collapse. You will have no economic provisions. Your economies will fail if there is no justice. Your morality will be lost. There will be no political stability, and because of that, there will be no pursuit of knowledge and arts. The reason why Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain, produced such a magnificent civilization was because of the sense of security and justice offered and sustained by the Umayyad Amirs of Al-Andalus for nearly 3 centuries. When that unity was broken, when the Umayyad Caliphate collapsed, or when it crumbled, within 50 years, the Catholics from the north started to take land, one after another. So much so that 1066 was the first loss. Muslims lost Barcelona. They lost Barbastro. There was a city in the north called Barbastro. In 1066, that city was lost. Then, a center of Muslim learning, the city of Toledo, in the Arabic language, and in the English language or in the Latin language, Toledo. Toledo. Toledo was lost in 1085 to King Alfonso, coming from the north. Because the Muslims now had split into different groups in small petty states. Valencia is one state, Murcia is another state. Then we have so many different states within the Iberian Peninsula. Okay, so now the outcome, because they were all split and they were fighting each other for territory, for influence, they lost the unity. When they lost the unity, the Catholics from the north, they took advantage and then began Reconquista, what we know in the history of Spain as Reconquista. They started to conquer one after another. And when things became so severe that some of the Muslims realized, hold on, if we don't have outside intervention, we will lose all of Spain. So in 1080s, one of the Muslim rulers of a petty state, one of the Tawaif, he contacted Yusuf ibn Tashfin, who was the ruler of Morocco, or much of North Africa at the time. Al-Murabitun, he was the ruler of Al-Murabitun. He got in touch with him, cut the long story short, asked him to rescue the Muslims. Some people said to him in Spain, because Spain was shockingly civilized. Spain, Islamic Spain, Al-Andalus was the most civilized piece of land in the world at the time. Right? Spain was New York, London, Paris, Sydney plus. By the standards of the 11th and the 12th centuries, Spain was all of these cities plus at the time. You know, all the cities of Spain, they were very, very civilized. So Al-Murabit, some people said, why are you inviting these desert, savages to come and defend Spain? So this Muslim ruler made a very famous statement, which is historically documented, that I would rather be a shepherd for camels than be a shepherd for pigs. In other words, he was saying, when the Catholics will come down, ruling or conquering the land of Spain, they will bring pigs with them, because pigs were a very common, delicacy among the Christians of the north at the time. It still is in many countries to this day, right? So he was referring to being a shepherd or a farmer of pigs. So he had he had two choices: either be a farmer for pigs or be a shepherd for camels. He said, I would rather be a shepherd for camels. So then the Al-Murabitun, they came to Spain and they checked Reconquista, or the Catholic taking of Al-Andalus, for another 2 centuries. Effectively, they stopped the advance of the Catholic Church and the Catholic kings coming from the north, backed by the Catholic Church, of course, because they called it a crusade. It was a crusade against the Muslims of Spain, right? So this advance was checked by the intervention of Al-Murabitun. So Al-Murabitun governed for almost another century, and then came Al-Muwahidun. Al-Muwahidun were a very strict, almost an extremist group of Muslims who came in, and they forced many of the principles on the people of Al-Andalus, and then they lost a very, very important battle against the Catholics coming from the north in the year 1212. This battle caused the loss of almost all of Spain except Granada, except the state of Granada. So after the Muwahidun or Al-Muwahidun, Al-Mohads in the English language, they are known as Al-Mohads, after they lost the battle which took place in 1212 against the Catholics of the north, the city of Valencia, Cordoba, Seville, all of these city-states, they fell to the Catholics from the north. And what remained was Granada or Granada in the south. And this state of Granada lasted for another 2 centuries, because the Christians, having taken so much land from the Muslims, started to fight each other. So because the Christians were divided, or the Catholics from the north, they were divided between each other, the state of Granada survived, and it became a tributary to the state of Castile, which was in the north. I mean, I cannot give you all the details in such a short time. My time is up. Sheikh Uthman Latif is here to deliver his talk, his lecture, inshallah ta'ala, which you must listen to, because it's a different topic. and also very inspirational, inshallah. So, to cut a long story short, for 2 centuries, Muslims survived in Gharnata, and they continued the glimmer of hope, or as we say, a glimmer of civilization in those lands. So, when the Christians came from the north, the Catholics, they actually adopted a lot of the Islamic culture. They became very Islamified. In fact, when you look at some of the buildings in Spain to this day, you will see, a direct impact of Islamic architecture and Islamic art, even on the Catholic architecture from the time when the Christians are taken. Not only that, the Catholic monarchs, some of them, they adopted the tolerance of the Muslim kings. When the Muslims were governing, they tolerated the Jewish and the Christian populations, and they encouraged them to coexist. And this was the attitude adopted by some of the earlier Catholic kings who came to power. It was later on, with the rise of the state of Castile and Aragon, when the king of the king of Aragon and the queen of Castile married each other. Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile, they got married, they united much of Spain, and then they decided to get rid of the last stronghold of the Muslims in Al-Andalus, which was Gharnata. Gharnata fell in 1492, and my brothers and sisters, this episode, the fall of Gharnata, is very, very painful. First, an edict was signed between the Muslims of Gharnata and the northern Catholic powers, in this case, coalition of Castile and Aragon, because the king and the queen had married. And by the way, their daughter was one of the wives of King Henry VIII. Her name was what? Sorry? Sister, go again? Catherine of Aragon. Catherine of Aragon, one of the wives of King Henry VIII, was a daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, people who took Gharnata from the Nasrids or the Muslims in Spain. So an edict was signed that the Muslims will keep their faith and they will continue to remain in status quo. Nothing will be changed. Just surrender. So once the Muslims surrender, what happened? All the edicts were broken, all the agreements were broken. Muslims were forced brutally into Catholicism. They were forcefully baptized, okay? And Muslim books were systematically burnt. Hundreds of thousands of volumes of rare works written by Muslim scholars throughout Spanish history were put to fire. Close to 1 million books were burnt after the conquest of Gharnata, and the Catholic monarchs were even contemplating destroying the last standing symbol of Muslim civilization in Al-Andalus, the Al-Hamra Palace. They wanted to demolish it, destroy it. But when they saw it, they could not come to destroy it. It was so beautiful, it was so striking. The art on it was so fascinating that they could not come to destroy it. And one of the results was of this reconquista was that Masjid Qartaba was the largest mosque in the world for many centuries. The Cordoba Mosque was one of the largest mosques in the world for many centuries. Later on, during the time of Charles V in the 16th century, a cathedral was resurrected. A Catholic cathedral was resurrected in the middle of the mosque, which stands to this day. And when Charles V saw the cathedral, he said that you have destroyed this structure. You have destroyed the mosque. The mosque was so beautiful. You have to go and see these places even today. The Masjid Qartaba still stands to this day. Horseshoe arches are still there. You will still see the mihrab, okay, with all the calligraphy and the artwork from 1,000 years ago, from the 10th century. You will see the artwork to this day. You will still see Al-Hamra Palace. If you go to Gharnata, it is standing to this day. It is actually one of the wonders of the world because the artwork on it is so beautiful. It is so amazing that to this day people are just in amazement. So, cut the long story short, this decline or this fall of the Muslims did not only impact the Muslims of Spain, it had a global impact. Remember, it was in 1492 after this conquest when Christopher Columbus landed in Hispaniola, okay, in the Americas, current day Haiti, okay, And this is when the destruction of the Native Americans started. So the decline of the Muslims in Spain impacted the world for the coming centuries. This is when colonialism started. This is when the European powers felt brave enough, because Muslims lost control of the Mediterranean. So long as the Muslims are in Granada, the Mediterranean Sea was controlled by either the Spanish Muslims or by the Ottomans. And one of the reasons why the Catholic monarchs wanted to destroy the last stronghold of the Muslims in Spain was to do away with this threat of the Ottomans, because the Ottomans, remember, in 1453, led by Sultan Muhammad al-Fatih, have already taken the city of Constantinople. That sent down shivers, that sent shivers down the spines of some of the clergy in Europe at the time, and they started screaming, we have to do something. And then there were reports that the Muslims were communicating with the Ottomans to do something about those Muslims who were suffering within the Christian states of the north, because they were being forced into Christianity. So what happened with these Muslims who were in the hundreds of thousands, and these were native Spanish Muslims? People think that these Muslims are Berbers or the Arabs. No. The majority of the Muslims in Spain in the 15th century were native Spanish Muslims. They were Spaniards. They were either Portuguese or Basques or Spaniards. They were actual Spaniards. Ethnically, they were European, and they had embraced Islam throughout the history of Islamic Spain. They ran into hundreds of thousands. One of the largest population of Muslims was in Seville. So what do? You force them to Christianity, to accept. So what happened? They started to force the Muslims into Catholicism, forced baptism. Droves upon droves were brought to this fountain where the Catholic clergy, and they were baptizing Muslims forcefully. You die or you convert. So Muslims, they were forced into it, but they never abandoned Islam. And this caused a rebellion in 1499. And Muslims took refuge in the Alpujarras mountains, where they fought many battles against these Catholic kings to protect their faith, to protect the Islam. And many hundreds of thousands were killed. Over 100,000 were killed, 200,000 were exiled, and 200,000 remained in Spain in some shape or form to basically pretend as Christians. But it didn't stop there. Throughout the 16th century, the Muslims of Spain were seen as the fifth column. They were seen as a threat from within, because the Ottomans were getting very, very strong. The Ottomans were very, very powerful within the Mediterranean region. So the Spanish kings were very, very worried about the Muslims of Spain. So they wanted to now either convert them conclusively or drive them out. So eventually in 1609, Philip III, the king of Spain, he issued a decree that you either die or you leave within 3 days. And you leave with what you can carry. You cannot take your possessions. You take with you what you can carry. And hundreds of thousands of Muslims perished. The Jews also perished with the Muslims. The decline of the Muslims meant the decline of the Jewish people. Okay, the Jewish people also suffered, right? So some people were able to make it to North Africa, others perished within, when they were on their way to the coast. Some were successfully transported, others were killed off, some people died, there were massacres. Wallahi, the history, the details are so painful as to what happened to the Muslims under the domain of the Catholics in Spain before the conquest of Granada and after the conquest of Granada. It is unbelievable cruelty and barbarity in history which is completely unknown to Muslims. I strongly recommend a book you must look into. Actually, few books, right? There is a book called Muslim Spain. It's 2 volumes, okay? It has been edited by Salma Khadra Jayusi. Okay, it's 2 volumes. Then there is another book called Muslim Spain by Anwar Shahna. Then there's another book compiled or authored by Richard Fletcher. It's also on Muslim Spain. Then there's another book, or you can also see the works of S.M. Imamuddin. S.M. Imamuddin was a Bengali historian, a scholar of Muslim Spain. He has written amazing books on the history of Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain. Then we have another book written by, I forgot the name, he's my supervisor, subhanallah, my teacher, Hugh Kennedy, Muslim, Spain and Portugal. That's another book. So L.P. Harvey has written, and all the books I'm mentioning are, by the way, academic sources. You will get a lot of history. And one blog in particular, short articles on the history of Spain, is called Balandalus. Balandalus, Balandalus, Balandalus.com or .org or something like that. This blog, you have to study it. There's a lot of history of Spain on this blog. You will see a lot about the expulsion of the Muslims and the Reconquista and what came with it. So, to summarize my talk, to finish it right now, to conclude, the fall of the Muslims in Spain, to reiterate, did not only affect the Muslims of Spain, it affected the Muslims of the world, and not only the Muslims of the world, but innocent non-Muslims of the world as well, because the rise of the European colonialism was one of the worst occurrences in human history. The Portuguese, the Spanish, and the Dutch, and the East India Company, it all happened after the fall of the Muslim Spain, after the fall of Granada. Think about it, okay? Christopher Columbus ended up in Americas, and the outcome was absolute devastation of the people of those lands. Christopher Columbus has been now completely disowned and rejected by Native Americans, or even Central Americans and South Americans. They do not see him as their hero. They have actually removed his statues because they have come to learn the history. He single-handedly caused the deaths of millions of people, and later on Spanish and Portuguese settlers, when they came in, and then the British settlers or European settlers in general, when they took these lands, they conducted cold-blooded massacres against the native populations of these lands. And not only that, Portuguese ended up in India. They ended up colonizing much of Africa. India was completely colonized by the East India Company, and the aftermath, you have to see what happened in India. In particular, read Shashi Tharoor's book, The Dark Empire. Shashi Tharoor is an Indian author from India. He's an Indian politician, also a historian. He has written his book, The Dark Empire. See what happened as a result of the fall of Granada. Why am I linking later European colonialism with the fall of Granada? Because that's the tipping point. That's when all hell broke loose, because the influence of the Ottomans was lost as far as the Mediterranean Sea was concerned. Then came the monster called colonialism. Okay, so brothers and sisters, I can talk a lot about what Muslim Spain achieved for the world when there was a golden age in Spain. That's a very, very vast topic, but I would recommend one book in particular on that very topic so that you can look into it. It's called, the title of the book is Hidden Debt to Islamic Civilization. Hidden Debt to Islamic Civilization is written by a historian called Al-Jazairi. You can find the book online. Hidden Debt to Islamic Civilization is a book which is an encyclopedia of information, which will give you a lot of information on what Islamic Spain in particular did for the world. Thank you so much for listening. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.